When alcohol was banned in Nova Scotia during the Prohibition in the 1920s, reluctant liquor control inspector Clifford Rose encountered a formidable woman who had emerged as a charismatic and daring figure leading a clandestine mob operation that specialized in the smuggling of illegal booze. Her name was Amy Mason, but everyone knew her as the Queen of the Bootleggers.
You're listening to Backyard History, the hidden stories that happened in your own backyard, the podcast version of the weekly history column running in newspapers across the Maritimes, with your host and author, Andrew McLean.
Clifford Rose never wanted to become a liquor control inspector. In fact, he wrote in his autobiography, which is called 4 Years with the Demon Rum, that he considered the fact that he became one
a disaster.
He self-identified first and foremost as a Christian socialist, and while he was deeply interested in politics, he didn't have a particularly strong opinions one way or the other on prohibition, when booze was banned. This was perhaps a surprise, since he not only didn't drink himself, but he also squarely blamed alcohol for the downfall of his earlier political career, which led him to becoming a liquor inspector. His initiation into socialist politics had come when he was young. He dropped out of school in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia in grade 8.
As the result of a perverse Highland pride stirred up because I couldn't dress as well as the town boys.
He had dedicated himself to organizing unions, noting,
I threw energy and the best years of my life into the class struggle.
He became a high-ranking official in the IWW and the Secretary General of the Labour Party until 1920. Even though alcohol was illegal, many Nova Scotians found ways to get a hold of booze that was smuggled into the province by gangs of bootleggers. He felt that as a union man, he had witnessed the organized labor movement in Nova Scotia being
ruined by key men getting drunk at vital moments when they should have been sober.
Booze, also in a somewhat roundabout way, ruined his own beloved career because, after one top labor leader showed up to a meeting,
3 sheets to the wind, I lashed out at him and others for getting drunk at the critical moment.
And so, Clifford Rose was fired. The now unemployed Clifford Rose wandered aimlessly through life. He first tried and failed to open a grocery store, and then he later tried and failed to become a writer. Deciding that
I was doomed to the disappointment of getting a job,
Clifford Rose met up with A.J. Bannerman, an old school friend of his who had gone on to become a wealthy lumber baron to a prominent local politician with the ruling Conservative Party. Despite alcohol being illegal at the time of Prohibition, the first thing that A.J. Bannerman did at their meeting was offer Clifford Rose a drink. When Rose explained that he didn't drink, Bannerman was so impressed that he got him a job as a liquor control officer. Just like that. Rose, though, described his new job as
a pitiful and forlorn inspector.
Perhaps long-time Backyard History podcast listeners might remember, way back to our second ever episode called Joe Walnut and the Madawaska Mob. That story's very close to my heart, because it was actually the first ever Backyard History story to be published in the newspaper about 3 years ago. Now the column's in some 19 newspapers, and that story appears in the first ever Backyard History book called Forgotten Stories from Atlantic Canada's Past, which you can buy at backyardhistory.ca/shop. That story covered the intense rivalry between the straight-laced English detective William Carr and New Brunswick's rum-running mob boss with the distinctly less than intimidating alias of Joe Walnut. In that story, Detective Carr doggedly pursues Joe Walnut, who in turn doggedly pursues a massive payday worth of illegal booze the detective had seized from him. However, this rivalry between Nova Scotia Liquor Board Inspector Clifford Rose and Amy Mason, the woman he called the Queen of the Bootleggers, was basically the exact opposite of that. Turns out that both the new liquor inspector for Pictou, Nova Scotia, Clifford Rose, and the queen of the bootleggers, who was also operating out of the Pictou area, were very much aware of each other's existence. However, neither of them were actually particularly eager to confront the other. The freshly arrived Inspector Clifford Rose first took stock of
the infiltration of the rum trade.
Because of his old socialist ideals, though, Clifford Rose chose to view the liquor smuggling through the lens of social class, and he noted a distinct difference between two types of bootleggers. He noted that many were impoverished and unemployed fishermen who had turned to smuggling small amounts of booze just to get by, and he wrote,
"The poverty of the people in those little villages along the coast was pitiful. Down that wild stretch of coast, the ocean seems to brood over its next spell of anger when it will hurl its might against the giant rocks studding those inhospitable shores."
While many of these out-of-work fishermen might have been helping to smuggle a little booze to make it through the tough times, Clifford Rose also noticed that many bigger names were making vastly more money. Writing,
"The bootleggers were great buyers of new cars. They spent their money lavishly on new clothes. Also, I began to learn that there were powerful forces near the top in police who were holding off the day when a preventative force to curb smuggling would be set up."
According to his observations, this later group included corrupt politicians, including none other than the very man who had hired him, A.J. Bannerman. However, the politician didn't seem to particularly care that the new liquor inspector knew of his activities, even openly admitting as much to Rose, who later described the events leading to his first ever meeting with Queen of the Bootleggers in his book.
"One day when I was scouting around in my car, I caught sight of my old friend A.J. Bannerman tripping along in his usual sprightly manner. I called to him, asking him to jump in and tell me your troubles while we drive over Fraser's Mountain. There is a grand view from the top of this Cobequid Hill where Prince Edward Island, Pictou Island, and all those green patches of land that are scattered in Margamish Harbor seem to lie at one's feet."
With absolutely no hesitation whatsoever, the politician began complaining that due to the lingering effects of the economic recession that hit the Maritimes hard after the end of the First World War, his lumber business was struggling. Clifford Rose, though, mentioned that he had heard rumors that A.J. Bannerman was selling more than mere lumber, saying,
"But from all accounts and common gossip, you are getting into a position of affluence through rum."
He quickly added a line which turned out to be more than prescient, because actually many rich Maritimes families can still, even today, trace their wealth back to bootleggers.
"I told you long ago, rum will lay the foundation of many a Nova Scotian fortune."
Bannerman acknowledged this with a shrug, remarking that his political connections made it easy, telling the inspector,
"I've got friends. Without them, one can't get far in this game."
He didn't only have friends in the illegal smuggling business, but also had rivals, which is presumably why the politician asked the inspector,
"By the way, did you try to catch the Queen yet?"
"No, I haven't. She doesn't retail any smuggled goods locally, and I'm not going to go out of my way looking for trouble. I can find plenty on my own doorstep."
The corrupt politician tried to egg on the inspector to go after his rum-running rival, tipping him off to where the Queen of the Bootleggers gang would be picking up a load of booze that would soon be arriving by boat, saying,
"There's a queer yarn going the rounds down the Gulf shore. The Queen was having a cargo landed from the mothership, with her her fleet of cars being loaded. She happened to see one of the men throw a case of scotch into the bushes for his future use, and so she made a pass at him and laid him up for 2 hours. The Queen was in breeches, and she is hefty. Must have been quite the sight."
"Nothing doing, AJ. As I said before, I'm not looking for trouble."
As it would turn out, though, trouble in the form of one Amy Mason, also known as the Queen of the Bootleggers, found him only a matter of days later. He had gone to the courthouse to get some papers signed. She, meanwhile, was also at the same courthouse at the same time, bringing with her a famous criminal lawyer to defend a relative of hers who got caught on bootlegging charges. Inspector Clifford Rose was standing in the middle of the courthouse in the office of a deputy, waiting for him to return to the office to sign his papers for him when...
She saw me standing in the office and walked right in. The queen of the smugglers was in her early 40s, a big, handsome woman, wearing a neatly tailored suit. She walked with the air of abounding vitality and the sleek strength of a tiger. What a woman she was, and what a variety of life she had seen. Norse, horsewoman, part-time movie actress, and now back to the land of her birth to rule a crew of smugglers.
Hello, Cliff. We're all in the same game, so it's just as well to get acquainted when we're not enemies.
She whisked her famous smile in my direction. I was somewhat taken back at this cheery greeting, but it has been my good fortune in life to have known some attractive women, and the best way to keep out of entanglements is to treat them decent, whether they be high, low, good, or bad.
Liquor Inspector Clifford Rose greeted the Queen of the Bootleggers, saying,
It is a pleasure to meet you under the circumstances when we are not at dagger's point. Your ancestors and my ancestors have been in this country for over 100 years, and we find that to stay in Nova Scotia, we have to go into the rum business, though at different angles.
Right you are, Cliff. Let me close the door. We'll talk this thing over. My lawyer, Vernon, is getting paid plenty to look after the case. One of my forefathers was Barney McGee. That's where Barney's River got its name. We've had our roots in this soil for more than a century. Do you suppose I could get to the first base in this country? Not on your life. I had to go to the States to get anywhere, then had to come home to look after my old father and mother. And was I going to stand around and see someone else make all the dough out of this smuggling racket? Not a chance. I was born to live, and live I will.
I wanted to see our talk come to a close, for the town gossips who hung around the courthouse would have something to roll under their tongues telling how the queen and the inspector were closeted alone in the magistrate's office, so I told her. It can be well understood how a woman of your vibrant vitality could never be satisfied with the humdrum. Still, you're taking a great chance. The federal government is going to crack down on this smuggling racket sooner or later, and it wouldn't be nice for you to get caught.
Oh, I'm taking that chance. We are paying plenty in high places to keep things running smooth. Meanwhile, we're getting all the thrills that anyone could wish.
That was the only occasion during my 4-year term as inspector that I ever had a long talk with the Queen. But I always got a cheery,
"Hi, Cliff,"
from her when we chanced to meet.
While Liquor Inspector Clifford Rose kept his word and never did bother Amy Mason, the Queen of the Bootleggers' illegal smuggling operation, in September of 1925, she ventured outside of the region he was in charge of. She was caught in Ballantyne's Cove with a carload of rum. It seems that perhaps the corrupt politician, A.J. Bannerman, had gotten rid of his rum-running rival after all.
That was Backyard History with your host, Andrew McLean. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for another hidden story that happened in your own backyard. Produced by Jordan Lozier.